Hi everyone, I'm Christine. I work at the Hollowbrook Branch of the Mercer County Library System, and today we are going to do some cooking. What we are going to make is what I call Sunday gravy. A lot of people might know this as tomato sauce or pasta sauce, but Italian people from northern New Jersey, we call it gravy. And the reason we call it Sunday gravy is because usually we would eat it once a week. This is something we've been eating in my family for generations and generations. And even though it's quick to throw together, it does simmer on the stove for a few hours. So it's not the best thing to throw together on a weeknight when you get home from work. It's something you're going to want to make on the weekends. Having said that, once you make a pot of it, the pot we're going to make today is more than enough to feed my family of 4. There's always leftovers. So what I do is divide it up into Tupperware containers and put it in the freezer. And then once you have it frozen, it's a great weeknight dinner. You could just pull out one container of it, throw it in a pot, reheat it, and you're good to go. So I'm going to start by showing you what we're going to be using today. We have olive oil. We have 1 can. It is a 28-ounce can of tomato puree, dripping a little. We have 1 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes. You can also use the slightly larger cans of those if you prefer, but these are 28 ounces. You want at least the 28-ounce cans. We have salt and pepper. We have a few cloves of garlic chopped up. I have some chopped fresh basil, and if you don't have fresh basil at home, you can also use dried basil. That works just fine. I have a little bit of sugar, and I have some meat, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now, this recipe is something that's been made for in my family for generations, so I don't have exact amounts of things that go into it, other than the things that come in cans and things like that. It's something that we've just passed down by watching our parents do it, and we know how to do it. And it's okay that it's not exact amounts, because it's also something that you can add personal preferences to. My parents make it, my sisters make it, and when we each do it, it comes out slightly different, and that's okay. And you'll find a way to make it that you like it. Now, I just want to talk about the meat for a second. What I have here is hot Italian sausage. Now, the meat is optional. You don't have to add it if you're a vegetarian or you prefer not to. You can just skip the meat. But if you want to add meat, you actually have lots of choices. You can do sausage, this is hot, or you could do sweet sausage if you prefer. You can add meatballs, which I often do, and if I'm going to add meatballs, what I do is I shape them and bake them beforehand and then throw them in the gravy and let them simmer in there. You can also add chopped beef to it. Just fry it a little in the pan ahead of time and then add it to your gravy. You can add braciole. What braciole is it's a thinly sliced piece of beef or pork, and you spread on it some olive oil, some breadcrumbs, Parmesan, salt, pepper, and then you roll it up and tie it, fry it a little bit and put it in your gravy. You can also add pork neck bones to your gravy, so there's lots of choices. And sometimes I add more than one. A lot of times I add sausage because that's my husband's favorite, and then I'll add meatballs because that's my favorite. But today we're just going to add the hot Italian sausage. Okay, so let's get started. This is super easy. I have a big pot on my stove here, and I'm going to turn it on. And I'm first going to add some olive oil. Again, I don't have exact amounts. This is how I know how much olive oil to use. Once it kind of fully coats the bottom of the pan, then you're good. So you put enough in to get a nice coating covering the entire bottom of the pan, and that's the right amount of olive oil. To that, you're going to add your chopped garlic. Get it all in there. I don't want to waste any. Now, I think that was probably about 5 cloves of garlic that I added. Again, there's personal preference involved, so if you like things really garlicky, add a lot. If you don't like so much garlic, you can add less. And chop it how you like it. If you like big pieces of garlic, chop it like that. If you like it more finely chopped, feel free to do so. There's personal preference. But you want to add it to your olive oil, and we're going to let that simmer for a minute. Now you're going to wait for the garlic to get a little bit brown on the edge. You don't want to burn it, so you want to kind of watch it. And once that happens, we're going to add our tomatoes. We're going to add the can of tomato puree and the can of crushed tomatoes. Once we add the tomatoes, that's going to be a little too thick on its own, so we need to add some water. So what I'm going to do after I add the tomatoes is I'm going to fill each can about halfway full of water. I'll use that to rinse out any extra tomato that's in there, and I'll dump it in the pot. Again, there's a certain amount of personal preference involved here. So some people like their gravy thicker, and in that case you would add less water. If you like your gravy a little thinner, you can add more water, but I usually do about each can about half full of water. So I hear my garlic starting to sizzle, and it's going to start to turn brown around the edges. I'm going to put mine in a little early just to keep the video moving along, but you can wait a little longer. So once your garlic starts to get a little brown, we're going to dump in each can of tomato. That's my tomato puree. And then we have a can of crushed tomatoes. Now I'm going to pop off camera for 1 second to put my water in here. So now my can is about half full of water. I like to kind of swish it around a little bit to make sure I get all the tomato out. And that's going to go in as well. And I'm going to do the same thing with my other can. So now I have some water in that can. Swish it around to get all the tomato out. In we go, and that's the base for your gravy. It's basically just tomato sauce. So the seasonings you're going to add are salt and pepper. Again, I don't have exact amounts. If you like things saltier, add a little more. If you don't, add a little less. But I just like to sprinkle in a decent amount of salt and some pepper. And then we're going to add our basil. Like I said, I have fresh basil here. You can also use dried basil. I like to be nice and generous with the basil. If you're using fresh basil, that tends to be a little stronger. With dried basil, you can add quite a bit of basil to your gravy. And then finally, we are going to add a little bit of sugar. I would say this is about a half a teaspoon of sugar. This just cuts down on the acidity of the gravy a little bit. So I'm going to throw that in there. And then I'm just going to give that a stir. All right, so if you're not going to add meat to your gravy, you are done. You're just going to let this sit on the stove and let it simmer. If you don't have meat in there, it doesn't have to simmer that long. It could just be an hour or so, and then you're ready to go. If you're going to add meat, you would put it in now. So I'm going to just add my hot Italian sausage. All right, now with the sausage in there, I'm going to let this come to a boil. I'll cover it. I'm going to let it come to a boil, then I'm going to lower the heat so it's on a low simmer, and I'm going to leave this on the stove for about 3 hours simmering. The house is going to smell delicious, and when it's dinner time, I just put on a pot of pasta, and we're ready to go. We have our dinner. And like I said, any extras, freeze them, and it makes a great, quick weeknight dinner. So I hope you enjoy this old family recipe. Bon appetit!